company once owned 40% of an entire country's stock market. Not a sector, not an industry, the whole country. And when that company collapsed, the country went into recession. Engineers lost jobs by the tens of thousands. Tax revenues dried up. An entire generation of talent had to start over from scratch. The company was Nokia. The country was Finland. And the thing that destroyed them wasn't Apple. It wasn't Android. It wasn't even bad technology. It was one internal email, written by their own people, that leadership chose to ignore. In 1998, Nokia became the world's largest mobile phone manufacturer. That sentence doesn't hit hard enough, so let's make it real. Finland is a country of 5 million people. It's smaller than many American cities by population. And yet, by the year 2000, one Finnish company had become so dominant that its stock alone made up 40% of the Helsinki Stock Exchange. Nokia's share price rose 2,400% in a single decade. Their phones were in the pockets of presidents, students, taxi drivers, and grandmothers across 150 countries. The Nokia ringtone was the most recognized sound on the planet. In some developing markets, Nokia and phone were literally the same word. At peak, Nokia represented 4% of Finland's entire GDP and 25% of the country's total exports. Think about what that means. Finland's hospitals, schools, infrastructure, all partially funded by one company's tax payments. Universities restructured their entire engineering programs to feed Nokia's hiring needs. Cities were built around Nokia campuses. Finland didn't just have Nokia, Finland was Nokia, which made what came next not just a business story, but a national one. But here's what made Nokia truly dangerous to itself. And nobody talks about this part. Most people think Nokia made phones. That's not what made them powerful. Nokia's actual weapon was Symbian, their mobile operating system. Every manufacturer who wanted Symbian paid Nokia. Every developer who wanted Nokia's users went through Nokia's system. Every telecom carrier in the world negotiated with Nokia first. By 2007, Symbian ran on more mobile devices than any other OS on Earth. Nokia didn't just have market share, they had structural control of the entire industry. This is why when Steve Jobs walked on stage in January 2007 and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone," Nokia's engineers watched the keynote and stayed calm. The first iPhone had no 3G, the battery was average. It couldn't run third-party apps at launch. By every technical spec Nokia measured, the iPhone was an inferior product. They were completely right about the specs. They were catastrophically wrong about what they'd actually just seen. Because Jobs hadn't announced a phone, he'd announced a computer in your pocket. And Nokia's entire fortress was built to defend against phone competition, not that. Here's where this story stops being about technology and becomes about human fear. Nokia's own engineers had been raising alarms about Symbian for years before the iPhone arrived. The interface was rigid, touchscreen capability was primitive. The architecture couldn't scale the way a modern smartphone needed. These weren't small complaints. They were existential warnings from the people who understood the system most deeply. In internal communications that later surfaced through court documents and journalist investigations, Nokia's software engineers told senior leadership directly, "Symbian cannot win a touchscreen war. We have a replacement ready. It's called MeGo. Give us the resources and we'll build what beats the iPhone." Leadership said no, not because they didn't understand the problem, because they were afraid of what admitting the problem would do to Nokia's stock price. Former Nokia executives later testified to this openly. There was a culture of fear inside the company. Engineers who raised concerns about Symbian were sidelined. Project managers pushing for a touchscreen pivot were called alarmists. The people closest to the truth were the ones being most aggressively silenced. One former executive put it plainly, "People were afraid to deliver bad news upward. And when you can't deliver bad news, you can't fix bad problems." So Nokia kept building what it already knew how to build. And the world moved somewhere else entirely. And inside Nokia, someone already knew this. They'd written it down. Leadership just didn't want to hear it. Between 2007 and 2010, Nokia's collapse wasn't a cliff, it was a slow bleed. 49% global smartphone share in 2007, then 43%, then 34%, then 28%. Each quarter, Nokia's leadership pointed to raw sales numbers. They were still selling millions of phones because the global market was expanding, and told themselves the strategy was working. It wasn't. They were growing in low-margin emerging markets while Apple and Android consumed the high-margin premium segment, the segment where the profit actually lives. By 2010, the gap was impossible to hide. Nokia apps looked worse, Nokia browsers ran slower. You'd pick up a friend's iPhone and then look at your Nokia and feel it. That sinking awareness that you were holding yesterday's product. Nokia finally committed to a real pivot. They accelerated mego development. They hired aggressively in software. For the first time in years, there was momentum towards something genuinely new. Then they hired a new CEO. His name was Stephen Elop. He came from Microsoft, and 3 months into the job, he did something that made everything worse. Almost immediately. February 2011. Elop sends an internal memo to the entire company. He called it Burning Platform. The argument was stark. Nokia was standing on a burning oil rig. Symbian was finished. mego wasn't ready fast enough. The only path forward was to abandon both platforms immediately and partner exclusively with Microsoft's Windows Phone operating system. The memo was meant to stay internal. It leaked within hours. Nokia's stock dropped 14% in a single day. Overnight, developers who'd been building apps for mego walked away. Why build for a platform the CEO just called dead? Carriers who'd been planning Nokia launches started hedging their bets. Consumers who'd been considering a Nokia device suddenly had no idea what operating system it would even be running in 6 months. The memo designed to save Nokia had announced its vulnerability to the entire world simultaneously. Here's the brutal truth about Elop's memo. The diagnosis was correct. Nokia was on a burning platform. Symbian was finished. Those things were true. But broadcasting your own weakness to employees, developers, carriers, consumers, and every competitor at once, before you have a replacement ready? That's not a turnaround strategy. That's drowning loudly in public. By 2012, Nokia's global smartphone share had fallen below 5%. The Windows Phone partnership was generating phones that consumers largely ignored. The company was burning cash. The talent that had built Nokia's engineering reputation was leaving for Google, Apple, and Samsung. In 2013, Microsoft acquired Nokia's Devices and Services division for $7.2 billion. A company that had been worth 250 billion euros at its peak sold its core business for roughly 3 cents on the dollar. But here's the number that makes this unlike any other corporate collapse story. Nokia's fall didn't just destroy Nokia. It took Finland with it. 200 billion euros in market value, gone. For a country with a total GDP of roughly 200 billion euros at the time, this wasn't a stock market story. This was a sovereign economic catastrophe. Finland entered recession. Government tax revenues collapsed. Unemployment spiked in Espoo, Tampere, Oulu, the cities that had been built around Nokia's campuses. Finland lost approximately 10% of its total export revenue when the devices division died. Tens of thousands of engineers, highly skilled, globally competitive people, flooded a local job market that couldn't absorb them overnight. One company, one failed internal decision, one leaked memo, and a developed modern European nation went into economic recession. No country in modern history has ever been more dangerously concentrated in a single corporate bet. And no country has ever paid a higher price when that bet unraveled. But the most important part of this story isn't what Nokia lost, it's why. And once you see it, you'll recognize it everywhere. Nokia didn't lose because Apple was smarter. Nokia had the engineers, they had mego, they had the patents, the supply chain, the global distribution, and the brand recognition. They had everything a company needs to win. They lost because the people at the top were more afraid of the stock price than they were committed to the truth. When your own engineers tell you the foundation is crumbling, in writing with a solution attached, and you bury the report to protect quarterly numbers, that's not a technology failure. That's a leadership failure wearing a technology mask. Every dominant company eventually faces a single moment. The moment where surviving requires admitting publicly that the thing that made you great is dying. Nokia faced that moment in 2007. They had the internal voices. They had the time and the money and the technical talent. They chose the comfortable answer over the true one, and then watched both the comfort and the company disappear anyway. The engineers who wrote those internal warnings in 2007 weren't wrong. They were just ignored until it was too late, which turned out to be the most expensive decision in Finnish history. The next time someone on your team brings you news you don't want to hear, remember Nokia, because the cost of not listening isn't always a bad quarter. Sometimes it's everything. If this story hit different than you expected, the Kodak collapse follows almost the exact same pattern. And that one's even darker. Go watch it.